Engines roared as the biker gang pulled into the dusty truck stop parking lot, their arrival as loud and brash as their attitudes. Logan, the leader, cut the engine of his Harley, his eyes scanning the area with a mix of disdain and purpose. The truck stop, a modest roadside refuge for weary travelers, seemed like the perfect stage for him to remind his crew who was in charge. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of fried food and diesel. Shaquille O'Neal, towering above the booths, leaned casually against the counter, sipping a soda. He was dressed simply, basketball shorts, a hoodie, and sneakers, yet his sheer presence drew attention. His size alone was impossible to ignore, but most people in the room didn't realize they were standing in the shadow of a global icon. Logan stomped through the door with his gang in tow, their boots heavy against the linoleum. Conversations quieted, patrons shifted nervously, and the waitress froze mid-pour at a nearby table. Logan's gang was infamous in this part of the state, known for their intimidation tactics and wild antics. He loved the fear his presence commanded, but tonight, his bravado felt hollow. His gaze locked onto Shaq, who remained unfazed, sipping his drink. Logan smirked, nudging one of his crew as he muttered just loud enough for the room to hear. "Looks like we got ourselves a giant. Let's see if he's as tough as he is tall." The gang chuckled, their laughter a blend of malice and anticipation. Logan approached Shaq, planting himself squarely in his line of sight. "Hey, big guy," he sneered. "Truck stops like this aren't built for guys like you. You taking up too much space for the rest of us." Shaq turned his head slowly, his expression calm but his presence commanding. He didn't need to speak for everyone in the room to sense the shift in energy. When he finally broke the silence, his voice was deep and deliberate. "Truck stops big enough for everyone, man. Don't let the size fool you. It's about how you carry yourself." The waitress, still clutching the coffee pot, whispered to a customer at the counter. "That's Shaquille O'Neal. You know, the basketball legend? And didn't he wrestle in WWE once?" Logan either didn't hear her or didn't care. His confidence swelled as he interpreted Shaq's calm demeanor as a sign of weakness. "You think you're funny, huh? Big guy with big words. Let's see if you've got the guts to back him up." Shaq set his soda down and straightened his posture, his full height of over 7 feet looming over Logan. The gang leader's smirk faltered for a brief moment, but he quickly masked it with a chuckle. "What, you think you're gonna scare me just by standing there? I've faced worse." Shaq tilted his head slightly, a faint smile playing on his lips. "I'm not here to scare anyone. But it sounds like you're trying pretty hard to prove something. You sure this is about me?" The words hit Logan harder than he expected. His fists clenched, and his gang shifted behind him, sensing the tension. Logan wasn't about to back down, not in front of his crew, not in front of a room full of strangers. He took a step closer, his voice lowering into a growl. "You don't know who you're talking to." Shaq shrugged, unbothered. "You don't know me either. But I can tell you this, it's not about who's tougher or louder. It's about who's smarter." The gang leader scoffed, glancing back at his crew to ensure they were still on his side. "Smarter, huh? Well, I don't see how that's gonna help you when fists start flying." Shaq leaned in slightly, his tone steady but firm. "Here's the thing. I've been in bigger fights than this, with bigger stakes. And I learned a long time ago that proving yourself to people who don't matter isn't worth the effort." Logan froze for a moment, the weight of Shaq's words pressing down on him. But his pride wouldn't let him admit it. He gestured toward his gang, his voice rising again. "You think you're better than us? Bigger than us? You don't know what it's like to live the way we do, to fight for respect every single day." Shaq's expression softened, but his gaze remained steady. "Respect doesn't come from making other people afraid of you. It comes from how you treat people, how you lead. You want respect? You've got to give it first." For the first time, Logan hesitated. The room was silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. His crew waited for his next move, their loyalty hinging on his ability to take control. But deep down, Logan felt something unfamiliar, a flicker of doubt, a crack in the armor he'd spent years building. Shaq, sensing the shift, stepped back and took a deep breath. Look, I'm not here to fight you. I'm here to remind you that strength isn't just about muscle. It's about knowing when to stand tall and when to stand down. The waitress exhaled audibly, breaking the silence. Logan's jaw tightened, his pride at war with the seed of understanding Shaq had just planted. The gang leader took a step back, his face unreadable, as the tension in the room began to ease. The air in the truck stop settled, but Logan's thoughts churned with turmoil. His gang watched him closely, their loyalty hinging on his next move. He had spent years building his reputation as a fearless leader, someone who never backed down. To walk away now would risk everything he'd worked for. Yet Shaq's words lingered, stirring a discomfort he couldn't shake. Logan turned back to his crew, trying to gauge their reactions. Some shifted uncomfortably, others smirked as if waiting for him to escalate. His second-in-command, a wiry man with a snake tattoo winding up his neck, leaned in and muttered, "You're not gonna let him talk to you like that, are you?" The pressure mounted. Logan clenched his fists, his pride screaming for him to reassert control. But he also felt something else, a gnawing sense of inadequacy he hadn't confronted in years. Shaq's towering presence wasn't just physical. It was a reminder of all the ways Logan had fallen short of the man he wanted to be. Shaq, meanwhile, had returned to his soda, his calm demeanor unwavering. He wasn't ignoring Logan but giving him space to decide his next move. It was a subtle display of confidence, one that spoke louder than any words could. Logan finally broke the silence, his voice steady but strained. "You think you've got it all figured out, huh? Big guy like you, world at your feet. What do you know about fighting for respect?" Shaq looked up, his gaze steady. "More than you think. Respect isn't about size, money, or fame. It's about what you stand for and how you show up when it counts." The room fell silent again as Shaq continued, his voice carrying a weight that demanded attention. "You're leading these guys, right? They look up to you. But what are you leading them toward? More fights, more trouble, more pain? That's not strength. That's a cycle you can't win." Logan felt a pang of anger, but it wasn't directed at Shaq, it was at himself. The cracks in his carefully constructed image were becoming harder to ignore. He thought back to the choices that had brought him here, the fights he'd started to prove his worth, the bridges he'd burned in the name of power, the people he'd hurt along the way. One of his younger crew members, barely out of his teens, spoke up hesitantly. "Boss, maybe he's right. We don't have to keep doing this." Logan shot him a glare, but the boy's words hit a nerve. He realized that for all his bluster, he didn't want to drag these men down the same path he'd taken. They deserved better. And maybe, just maybe, he did too. Shaq, sensing the internal battle, leaned forward slightly. "I've been in the ring with some of the toughest guys in the world. You know what I learned? The strongest ones aren't the ones who hit the hardest, they're the ones who know when to walk away. It takes guts to change direction, to admit when you're wrong. That's real leadership." The words hung in the air, challenging Logan to rise above his pride. He glanced back at his crew, the faces of men who had followed him blindly, who trusted him to lead them. For the first time, he saw them not as a gang but as individuals, each with their own hopes, fears, and potential. Logan took a deep breath, the weight of his decisions pressing down on him. He turned back to Shaq, his voice quieter now. "And what about you? You've got all this wisdom, but what did it cost you to learn it?" Shaq's expression softened, a flicker of vulnerability crossing his face. "It cost me plenty. I've made mistakes, hurt people, lost things I can never get back. But I learned from it. That's the only way you grow, by facing what you've done and choosing to be better." The gang leader nodded slowly, the anger in his chest giving way to something unfamiliar, respect. Logan realized he didn't have to prove himself by fighting. He could prove himself by being the kind of leader his crew needed, a man who could admit his flaws and strive for something greater. He stepped back, his shoulders relaxing as he addressed his crew. "We're done here. Let's go." The gang hesitated, exchanging uncertain glances. Snake Tattoo frowned, his voice laced with disbelief. "You serious? You're just gonna let it go?" Logan met his gaze, his tone firm. Yeah, I am. And so are you. The authority in his voice silenced any further objections. One by one, the gang followed him out, their boots echoing against the linoleum. Logan paused at the door, glancing back at Shaq. For the first time, there was no malice in his eyes, only gratitude. Thanks, he said quietly before stepping outside. Shaq watched them leave, a small smile playing on his lips. He didn't need recognition or applause. The real victory was seeing a man take the first step toward redemption. Outside the truck stop, Logan leaned against his bike, the weight of his decision settling over him. The gang milled around uncertainly, their usual bravado replaced with quiet confusion. They weren't used to walking away from a confrontation, especially one where their leader had been challenged so directly. Snake Tattoo was the first to speak up, his tone sharp. What was that back there? Since when do we back down from anyone? Logan shot him a warning look. We didn't back down. We chose not to make a mess we'd regret. The younger biker, the one who had dared to voice agreement with Shaq earlier, chimed in hesitantly. It didn't feel like backing down. It felt smarter. That guy wasn't just some random dude. He's been through stuff. You could tell. Snake scoffed, crossing his arms. So what? We're just supposed to start listening to every big guy with a sob story? Logan's voice cut through the growing tension. Enough. This isn't about him. It's about us. You think picking fights is strength? It's not. It's weakness. And I'm done pretending it's anything else. The words felt foreign on his tongue, but also liberating. For years, Logan had built his reputation on toughness, on fear, on the very image Shaq had so effortlessly dismantled. But what had it really gotten him? A string of arrests, a broken relationship with his family, and a gang that relied on him for direction he wasn't sure he could provide. One of the older members, a grizzled man with a limp, stepped forward. So what now, Logan? You gonna turn us into choir boys? Logan shook his head. No. But I'm saying we need to think about what we're doing. Who we're hurting. Where this all ends. The grizzled biker tilted his head, considering Logan's words. You really think we can just change? After everything we've done? Logan hesitated, the doubts creeping in. Could they change? Could he? But then he thought of Shaq's words, the calm certainty in his voice when he'd said that real strength was knowing when to walk away. We don't have to be what we've always been, Logan said, his voice firm. It's not gonna be easy. But if we don't try, we'll just keep running in circles until we burn out or get locked up. Is that what you want? The gang was silent, the question hanging in the cool night air. For all their bravado, Logan knew the answer. None of them wanted to admit it, but they were tired of the fights, the danger, the endless cycle of proving themselves to a world that didn't care. The younger biker broke the silence. I'm in. I don't want to keep living like this. Snake rolled his eyes. Of course you are. You've always been soft. Logan turned to Snake, his expression hardening. If you've got a better idea, I'm listening. But if all you've got is more of the same, maybe this isn't the right crew for you anymore. The challenge hung in the air, and for a moment, it seemed like Snake might push back. But something in Logan's demeanor, something steadier, more resolute than they'd ever seen, made him pause. He grumbled under his breath but didn't argue further. Logan exhaled, feeling a flicker of relief. He wasn't naive enough to think one conversation would fix everything, but it was a start. He turned to the younger biker. What's your name, kid? Jamie, the boy said, standing a little taller. Well, Jamie, looks like you've got more sense than most of us. You stick with me, and we'll figure out how to make this work. The older biker with the limp nodded slowly. I don't know if you're right, Logan. But I've followed you this far. Might as well see where this goes. Logan nodded in gratitude, the beginnings of something new taking shape. He wasn't sure what their future would look like, but for the first time in years, it felt like it could be something better. As they mounted their bikes and rode off into the night, Logan felt a strange mix of fear and hope. Change was terrifying, but staying the same felt worse. And as he led his gang down the highway, he couldn't help but feel that Shaq had given him more than just a lesson in strength. He'd given him a second chance. The gang rode silently down the highway, the rhythmic hum of their engines a backdrop to Logan's racing thoughts. The night stretched endlessly ahead, punctuated by the occasional glow of distant headlights. Logan felt the weight of responsibility heavier than ever, responsibility not just for his actions, but for the men who followed him. He couldn't shake Shaq's words. They played in his mind like a broken record. Real strength isn't in your fists. It's in knowing when to let go. For years, Logan had believed his strength lay in his ability to dominate, to fight, to never back down. Now, he was beginning to realize how hollow that strength had been. At a gas station along the deserted stretch of road, the gang stopped to refuel. The younger members gathered around Jamie, exchanging quiet words about what had happened back at the truck stop. Logan stood apart, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The grizzled biker with a limp, whose name was Roy, approached him. "You okay?" Roy asked, his voice low but steady. Logan nodded absently. "Just thinking." Roy smirked. "That's a new look for you." Logan didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he crossed his arms and leaned against his bike. "What do you think, Roy?" "About all this?" Roy shrugged. "I think you've got a point. We've been spinning our wheels for years, trying to prove we're something. But what have we really done, huh? Robbed some convenience stores? Gotten into bar fights? Doesn't exactly scream legacy." The words struck a chord with Logan. Legacy. It wasn't something he'd ever thought about before, but now it loomed large in his mind. What would he leave behind? What would any of them? "I don't want this to be it," Logan said quietly. "I don't want to be remembered as some thug who never knew when to quit." Roy nodded, his weathered face softening. "Then maybe it's time we start doing things differently." The idea of change was daunting, but it also felt like a lifeline. Logan looked at the gang, at the younger members who still had their whole lives ahead of them. Jamie caught his eye and gave a small nod, as if to say he was ready to follow wherever Logan led. Back on the road, Logan let his mind wander to the past. He thought about his younger self, a scrappy kid with too much anger and nowhere to put it. He remembered the first time he got into a fight, the adrenaline rush, the fleeting sense of power. It had felt good, until it didn't. He thought about his parents, long gone now, and the disappointment in their eyes when he dropped out of school. He thought about his brother, who had tried to steer him onto a better path, only for Logan to push him away. Regret was a bitter pill to swallow, but it also fueled his determination. If he couldn't undo his past mistakes, maybe he could at least keep the younger members of his gang from making the same ones. As dawn broke, the gang reached a small diner on the edge of a quiet town. They parked their bikes and filed inside, their presence drawing wary glances from the handful of early morning patrons. Logan noticed the looks but didn't react. He was used to being judged, to the assumptions people made about men like him. Over coffee and breakfast, the gang finally began to talk, really talk. For the first time, Logan opened up about his doubts, his fears, and his hopes for something better. "I'm not saying it's gonna be easy," he said, his voice steady but earnest. "But we've got a chance to turn this around. To be more than what people expect us to be." Snake Tattoo, who had been brooding since their encounter with Shaq, finally spoke up. "And what if we fail? What if we try to change and it all goes to hell?" Logan met his gaze without flinching. "Then at least we'll know we tried. At least we'll know we didn't just keep taking the easy way out." The gang was silent, each man lost in his own thoughts. Logan didn't push them for answers. He knew change wouldn't happen overnight, and he didn't expect everyone to be on board right away. But he felt a glimmer of hope, a sense that maybe, just maybe, they were ready to take the first step. As they prepared to hit the road again, Logan caught Jamie watching him. The younger biker hesitated, then said, "Thanks for standing up back there. Not just to Shaq, but to us. I think we needed to hear it." Logan nodded, a small but genuine smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "We've all got a lot to learn, kid. But we'll figure it out. Together. The sun was fully up now, casting a golden light over the road ahead. For the first time in a long time, Logan felt like he was heading somewhere worth going. The gang's ride stretched into midday, the sun high in the sky, casting long shadows of their bikes along the asphalt. Logan found himself reflecting on the unexpected power of words. Shaq hadn't raised a hand, but he delivered a blow harder than any punch Logan had ever taken. It wasn't just Shaq's size or fame that had left an impact, it was the man's unflinching honesty and his ability to see past the surface. They pulled over at a rest area by a scenic overlook. Logan could hear the murmurs among the group as they dismounted. Roy leaned against his bike, rubbing his knee absent-mindedly, while Jamie sat on a rock, staring out over the vast expanse of green below. There was a quiet tension in the air, a sense that something was shifting. Logan stepped away from the group, needing a moment to himself. He paced along the edge of the overlook, running his hand through his hair, trying to organize the mess of thoughts in his head. His entire life had been built on the idea of control, controlling his surroundings, his crew, and his reputation. But what Shaq had done, what he had said, had flipped that foundation upside down. Jamie eventually approached him, his posture tentative. "Hey, Logan," he started, his voice unsteady but determined. "You ever think about what comes next? Like after all this?" Logan raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean, after all this?" "I mean, we can't keep doing this forever. Riding around, picking fights, acting like we've got something to prove. What's it all for?" Jamie hesitated, then added, "I'm not saying I want out or anything. I don't know. I guess I'm starting to wonder if there's more to life than this." Logan looked at him for a long moment, the younger man's words hitting close to home. "You're not wrong," Logan admitted finally. "I've been thinking the same thing." Jamie seemed surprised by the admission, but he nodded, encouraged. "You think we could change? Like actually change? Or is it too late for us?" Logan sighed, his gaze drifting to the horizon. "I don't know, Jamie. I really don't. But what I do know is that if we keep going the way we are, there's only one place we're gonna end up. And it's not somewhere any of us want to be." The rest of the gang had started to gather nearby, their conversation quiet but their attention subtly focused on Logan and Jamie. Snake Tattoo crossed his arms, his expression skeptical but not hostile. Roy stood a little apart from the others, watching Logan with an almost fatherly curiosity. Logan turned to face the group, his voice steady but firm. "Look, I'm not saying we need to drop everything and go start a charity or something. But maybe it's time we think about what kind of mark we're leaving on the world. Right now, all we've got is a reputation for being trouble. And yeah, that might feel good in the moment, but it doesn't last. It doesn't mean anything." Snake scoffed. "And what, you think we can just flip a switch and be saints? That's not how this works, Logan." "I'm not talking about being saints," Logan shot back. "I'm talking about being better. For ourselves. For each other. We've all made mistakes. Hell, I've made more than my fair share. But we don't have to keep making the same ones over and over again." The gang exchanged glances, uncertainty etched on their faces. Logan could see the resistance in some of them, the fear of change. But he also saw something else, a spark of hope, however faint, that maybe things could be different. Roy finally spoke up, his voice calm but firm. "Logan's right. We've been chasing our tails for years, acting like we're invincible. But the truth is, we're not. Sooner or later, this lifestyle is gonna catch up with us. And when it does, it's not gonna be pretty." Snake muttered something under his breath but didn't argue further. Logan took that as a small victory. As the gang prepared to head back out, Logan felt a newfound sense of purpose taking root. He didn't have all the answers, and he knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. But for the first time, he felt like they were riding towards something instead of running from it. As they started their engines and pulled back onto the highway, Logan glanced over at Jamie, who gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't much, but it was enough to tell Logan he wasn't alone in this. The miles stretched ahead, the road winding through valleys and hills, the sun casting long shadows as the day wore on. Logan's mind drifted to the people they'd encountered over the years, the bridges they'd burned, the opportunities they'd squandered. He thought about his brother, about the look of disappointment on his face the last time they'd spoken. For the first time, Logan didn't feel the usual pang of defensiveness when those memories surfaced. Instead, he felt something else, resolve. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, the gang reached a small town and pulled into the parking lot of a diner. Logan took a deep breath, his hands tightening on the handlebars. He didn't know exactly what lay ahead, but he knew one thing for sure: he wasn't going back to the way things were. Logan entered the diner with a new sense of conviction, but the weight of the journey ahead still lingered. The group filtered in behind him, each one subtly shifting their posture as they realized they were stepping into a different kind of place. The smell of fried food and coffee hit their noses, familiar but somehow foreign. It wasn't the kind of joint where they usually felt at ease. This place was quiet, small, and full of families. The waitress, a woman in her mid-30s with kind eyes, greeted them with a warm smile. She didn't seem intimidated by the rowdy group of bikers. "You folks want a table?" she asked, unfazed by their worn leather jackets and gruff demeanor. Logan nodded, scanning the room for a corner booth that would give them some space. As the waitress led them to the table, he noticed the other patrons glancing up, some nervously, others simply curious. For a moment, Logan could feel the familiar urge to assert control, to intimidate and make it clear that they weren't to be messed with. But the thought of Shaq's words, his steady gaze and unflinching wisdom, stopped him. They sat down, ordering food without much conversation. The silence stretched, but it wasn't the usual tense silence of their gang. This one felt different. It was as if they were all processing something too big to articulate. The weight of their earlier encounter with Shaq still hung in the air, each person navigating their own thoughts. Jamie was the first to break the silence. His voice was quiet, but there was a hint of hope in it. "You think we can really do this?" he asked, looking directly at Logan. "I mean, really change?" Logan looked across the table at his gang, their faces a mix of skepticism and curiosity. "I don't know," he said honestly. "But what I do know is that we can't keep going the way we've been. That path doesn't lead anywhere good." Roy, the oldest of the group, leaned forward, his elbows on the table. "Change isn't easy, kid. We've been living like this for a long time. It's not gonna be some magic switch. But maybe it's time for something different." Snake, who had remained mostly quiet since their conversation at the Overlook, finally spoke. "I don't know, Logan. I get the feeling this isn't just about us anymore. Maybe there's more at play here. Like maybe we've been part of a bigger problem all along." Logan looked at Snake, seeing the shift in his eyes. For a long time, Snake had been the most resistant to any notion of change. He was a man defined by his need to control his environment. But now, in the quiet hum of the diner, something was shifting within him too. "That's what I'm saying," Logan replied. "It's not just about us anymore. It's about how we fit into all of this, the world, the people around us, the choices we make." As the waitress brought over their food, there was a moment of peace. The gang dug into their meals, but the conversation didn't stop. The questions kept coming, each one harder than the last. "What about the people we've hurt?" Jamie asked, his voice laced with guilt. "The stuff we've done to people who didn't deserve it?" Logan paused, the weight of that question hitting him squarely in the chest. "We can't undo the past. But we can start making things right. It won't be easy, and it won't happen overnight, but we have to try." Roy shook his head, his eyes clouded with frustration. "And what if we try, and it's still not enough? What if they don't forgive us?" "Then we keep trying," Logan said firmly. "Because that's the only thing we can control. We can't make people forgive us. But we can show them that we're serious about changing. We can show them we're willing to fight for something better." The conversation carried on, each member of the gang slowly starting to open up, peeling back layers they hadn't even realized existed. It was uncomfortable, raw, but it was the kind of honesty they had avoided for years. They spoke about their regrets, their mistakes, and the things they feared. And through it all, Logan realized something powerful. They weren't just a gang of bikers anymore. They were a group of people who were trying to make sense of their lives, to find a way out of the chaos they had created. By the time they finished their meals, the tension in the room had dissipated, replaced with something unexpected: hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, they could do better. That maybe, despite the mistakes they'd made, they still had time to write a new chapter. The waitress came to clear their plates, her smile just as warm as before. As she picked up the dishes, she paused for a moment, as if hesitant. "You guys good?" she asked, her tone kind but probing. Logan looked up at her, sensing the quiet judgment in her eyes, but instead of the usual defensive reaction, he met her gaze directly. "We're trying," he said simply. She nodded, offering him a knowing smile. "Well, that's all anyone can do." As she left, Logan felt the weight of her words settle over him. It wasn't just about their gang anymore. It wasn't just about their past. It was about the journey ahead, the transformation they were embarking on. The world wasn't going to forgive them overnight, but maybe, just maybe, they could earn a second chance. They paid the bill and stood up, ready to leave the diner, but this time, Logan wasn't in a hurry to get back on the road. For the first time, the idea of change didn't feel impossible. It felt like a challenge, one he was willing to face head-on. As they left the diner, the sky had shifted. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden hue over the landscape, and the cool air seemed to hold a sense of possibility. The gang gathered around their bikes, the familiar sound of engines revving filling the quiet evening air. But there was something different about the way they moved, the way they looked at each other. The hardened, cynical edge that had once defined them had started to soften, just a little. Logan looked at his gang, each one of them standing in their own silence, processing the conversation that had unfolded in the diner. It wasn't just about the words they'd shared, it was about the understanding that had begun to grow between them. They were no longer just a group of individuals bound by shared history. They were starting to become something more. Something better. But Logan knew that the real challenge was about to begin. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy. The changes they wanted to make weren't going to come overnight. It was going to take more than just words. It was going to take action. Snake was the first to speak, his voice low but steady. "What now?" he asked, looking at Logan with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. Logan took a deep breath, his hand resting on the handlebar of his bike as he stared out at the open road ahead. "Now we start walking the talk," he said, his voice filled with a quiet determination. "We start making the choices that match the kind of people we want to be. We show the world that we're not just a bunch of bikers looking for trouble. We show them we're capable of something more." Jamie nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You really think people are going to buy it? I mean, we've spent so long being a part of the problem. Can we really change that fast?" Logan met his gaze, the weight of the question pressing down on him. "No, we can't change it fast. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't try. Every day, we make choices. We've been making bad ones for a long time, but that doesn't mean we can't start making good ones now." Roy, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke up. "I've seen a lot of people try to change, kid. Most of them don't make it. They fall back into the same old habits, same old ways. It's hard. Real hard." Logan nodded. "Yeah, I know. But that's not an excuse. It's a reason to fight harder." His voice grew firmer. "If we're serious about this, we have to be willing to face the hardest part, facing ourselves. We've spent so long avoiding the truth about who we are. Now it's time to face it head on." There was a heavy silence as each of them processed what Logan had said. It was a lot to take in. The road to redemption was never easy, and they all knew it. But for the first time in a long time, there was a flicker of belief in the air, a belief that maybe, just maybe, they could do this. As they mounted their bikes, Logan could feel a shift within himself, too. He was no longer just leading a gang. He was leading a group of men who were willing to face the hardest truths about themselves. That was the real victory, and it wasn't something that could be measured by the number of people they intimidated or the power they held. It was something deeper. They set off down the road, the sound of their engines roaring into the evening as the sun dipped lower in the sky. It was a new beginning, one that was built on the kind of honesty and vulnerability that they had never embraced before. The road ahead was uncertain, but they knew one thing for sure: they weren't alone in this journey anymore. As they rode, Logan thought about Shaq's words, the way the big man had spoken to him, with a calm wisdom that seemed to defy the world around him. He thought about the example Shaq had set, not through physical strength, but through mental fortitude and resilience. Shaq had faced adversity head-on, not with anger or violence, but with a steady resolve that had won people's respect in a way nothing else could. Logan wasn't sure if they would ever be able to live up to that standard, but one thing was clear: they weren't going to let their past define them anymore. The mistakes they had made were still part of them, but they no longer had to control their future. The open road stretched before them, the possibilities endless. They were on the brink of something new, and while they didn't have all the answers, they knew that they were finally on the right path. As the sun disappeared below the horizon, the world around them began to fade into the quiet of the night. But the gang wasn't afraid of the darkness anymore. They had each other, and for the first time in a long time, that was enough. As the days passed, the gang started to see the fruits of their efforts. It wasn't an instant transformation. Change rarely came that easily. But there were small victories, quiet moments of growth that built upon each other. Each day, they made the decision to face their past, to hold themselves accountable for the things they had done wrong, and to push forward towards something better. Logan, who had once been the embodiment of the gang's defiance and aggression, now found himself taking on a different kind of leadership. It wasn't about proving his strength anymore. It was about showing his men that vulnerability could be just as powerful as physical dominance. It was about teaching them that real strength came from within, from the ability to face your flaws, learn from them, and grow. One evening, they gathered around a fire, the flames flickering as the night air settled around them. The conversation had shifted away from the usual tough talk and bickering that used to dominate their nights. Instead, they spoke about their past, about the mistakes they had made, the people they had hurt, and the regrets that weighed on them. Jamie, who had always been the quiet one, was the first to open up. "I've been thinking about my brother a lot lately," he said, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "I used to beat the hell out of him just to prove I was tougher. I thought it made me a man. But now, I don't know if I was ever really a man. I've been running from the truth for so long." The others listened, their faces somber, as they processed his words. It was the kind of confession that had once been unheard of in their group. For years, their bravado had been their shield, their way of avoiding the deeper truths. But now, as each man began to speak, the weight of their shared experiences created an unspoken bond, a bond forged in the understanding that they were all struggling in their own ways. Roy, who had always been the cynic, was next. "I never thought I had a reason to change. Hell, I thought I was just fine the way I was. But seeing what Shaq did, the way he handled things with his head, not his fists, man, it made me question everything." He let out a long breath, his gaze fixed on the flames. "I've hurt people, too. People I care about. And I don't know how to make it right." Logan nodded, a knowing look in his eyes. He had been there, too. There had been a time when he believed that brute force was the answer to every problem, that silence and strength would protect him from the vulnerabilities that came with true connection. But Shaq had shown him that there was more to life than that. There was power in redemption, in admitting your flaws, and in working to become better every day. The gang sat in silence for a while, each man lost in their thoughts. The crackling of the fire was the only sound that filled the quiet night. It was a rare moment of reflection, and though it was uncomfortable, it was also liberating. Logan spoke first, breaking the silence. "This isn't easy. But I think we've made a start. We've faced our past, and we're not running from it anymore. We're not hiding behind the masks we used to wear." He paused, looking around at each of them. "The road ahead isn't going to be smooth, but we can walk it together. There was a sense of understanding among them now, a recognition that they were no longer just a group of outcasts trying to survive in a world that had rejected them. They were beginning to see that their strength lay not in their ability to dominate or intimidate, but in their ability to stand up, to own their mistakes, and to move forward with purpose. The shift in their mindset wasn't just a personal victory, it was a collective one. They had come together, not just as a gang of bikers, but as individuals striving for something greater than the sum of their past actions. They had learned the value of empathy, of looking beyond themselves and understanding the pain and struggles of others. They had begun to understand that their legacy didn't have to be defined by their past mistakes. It could be defined by the choices they made going forward. As the fire burned low, Logan felt a sense of peace settle over him. It was a peace that had once seemed impossible to attain, but now, as he looked around at the faces of the men he had come to respect, he realized that they had reached a turning point. They weren't the same group of men who had walked into that truck stop weeks ago. They had been forever changed by the experience, and by their own willingness to face their flaws and make amends. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time, Logan felt hopeful. He knew that the work wasn't over. The road to redemption was long, and there would be times when they faltered, when the temptation to slip back into old habits would be strong. But the difference now was that they knew they didn't have to face it alone. They had each other, and that was something they had never truly had before. As the last of the fire's embers flickered out, the gang stood together, silently acknowledging the unspoken bond that had been forged between them. It wasn't just about the bikes anymore. It wasn't about the violence, or the reputation they had built for themselves. It was about something deeper, about transformation, about growth, and about the courage to be better, even when it seemed impossible. With that, they mounted their bikes once more, the engines roaring to life as they rode off into the night. The road ahead was still long, but they were no longer afraid of it. They had finally found their way, and they were ready to face whatever came next.